I pulled into my sister Jessica's driveway that sunny Saturday afternoon, expecting nothing more than cake and family time at my nephew Mason's 9th birthday party. My wife Amanda grabbed the gift bag while I helped 8-year-old Tyler out of the back seat. That's when I noticed the dark purple bruise circling his left eye. Before I could ask questions, we joined the backyard gathering where relatives filled picnic tables decorated with superhero balloons. Mason smugly announced to everyone within earshot that he had given Tyler the black eye because he just taught him a lesson, and his parents say he's never wrong anyway. Nervous chuckles rippled through the adults, treating it like typical boy behavior. Then Tyler's voice trembled as he quietly spoke up, revealing something that froze every conversation mid-sentence and sent Jessica's champagne glass crashing against the patio stones. The sound of shattering glass seemed to echo forever as Tyler's words hung in the air like a thunderclap. My son's small voice had carried across the entire backyard when he said, "Mason didn't just hit me once. He's been hurting lots of kids at school for months, and he told me he'd hurt Cousin Kevin if I ever told anyone." I felt my stomach drop as I watched Tyler's bottom lip quiver. Amanda immediately moved to his side, her nurse instincts kicking in as she gently tilted his chin up to examine the bruising more closely. The party had gone completely silent, except for the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower. "Tyler, sweetie," Amanda said softly, "can you tell us exactly what happened?" My son looked around at all the faces staring at him, then back at Mason, who was glaring with undisguised menace. Tyler took a shaky breath and began speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. It was behind the gym at school on Wednesday. Mason cornered me when I was walking to the library. He said I was a snitch for telling Mrs. Chen that he pushed Emma off the monkey bars. 2 other boys held my arms while Mason kicked me in the stomach and punched my face. I felt rage building in my chest as Tyler continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. But the worst part was what he said after. He told me he knew where my little cousin Kevin lives, and if I ever told any grown-ups about what he does to kids, he would make sure Kevin got hurt really bad. The silence was deafening. I looked around the table at my family members, waiting for someone to respond appropriately to what we'd just heard. Instead, I watched Jessica jump to her feet, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Tyler is obviously exaggerating," she said quickly, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow and desperate. "Boys will be boys. This is just normal childhood roughhousing that got a little out of hand." My brother-in-law, Brad, nodded emphatically, setting down his beer with unnecessary force. "Exactly right. Kids need to learn how to handle themselves in the real world. Tyler just needs to toughen up and stop being so sensitive about everything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sensitive. I stood up, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "My son is describing systematic bullying and threats against a 6-year-old child, and you're calling him sensitive." Amanda had lifted Tyler's shirt slightly and gasped. Dark bruises covered his rib cage in a pattern that clearly showed where he'd been kicked repeatedly. "Cornell, look at this. These injuries are from serious physical assault, not playground scuffles." My mother, Dorothy, who had been quietly cutting cake during the whole exchange, finally spoke up. "Now, everyone just needs to calm down. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding here. Children sometimes get carried away when they're playing, and stories can get blown out of proportion." I stared at my mother in disbelief. Here was my 8-year-old son showing physical evidence of abuse and describing threats against his younger cousin, and my family's response was to minimize and dismiss everything he'd said. Tyler pulled his shirt back down and looked directly at Mason, who had remained silent throughout the entire confrontation. Tell them about the other kids, Mason. Tell them about how you made Sarah cry so hard she threw up. Tell them about how you held Marcus's head in the water fountain until he couldn't breathe. Mason's response chilled me to the bone. Instead of denying the accusations or showing any remorse, he simply smiled and said, "They deserved it. Weak kids need to learn their place just like Tyler did." The casual cruelty in his voice made my blood run cold. This wasn't normal childhood behavior or even typical bullying. This was something much darker and more calculated. Jessica grabbed Mason's arm and pulled him toward the house. "That's enough. Mason, go to your room. The adults need to talk." But as they walked away, I heard Mason whisper to Tyler just loud enough for me to catch. "Remember what I said about Kevin. Keep your mouth shut or else." I realized in that moment that my family gathering had just revealed something far more serious than a simple playground disagreement. My son had been systematically terrorized, and my own family was more interested in preserving appearances than protecting him. The birthday party was effectively over, but the real battle was just beginning. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I'd spent the entire weekend replaying Saturday's events, and what bothered me most was how quickly my family had rallied to defend Mason while dismissing Tyler's obvious trauma. I decided it was time to dig deeper. I started by calling the school during my lunch break at the accounting firm where I worked. When I identified myself as Tyler's father and asked to speak with the principal about a bullying concern, the secretary immediately transferred me to Principal Janet Williams. "Mr. Cornell," Principal Williams said, and I could hear the wariness in her voice. "What can I help you with today?" "I need to discuss Mason Henderson's behavior toward my son, and apparently several other children. My son has disclosed some very serious incidents that I believe need immediate investigation." There was a long pause before she responded. "Mr. Cornell, I think there may be some misunderstandings about the situation. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting to discuss this more thoroughly." Something in her tone set off alarm bells. What kind of misunderstandings? My son has physical injuries and has described systematic bullying and threats. What's unclear about that? Another pause. "Well, Mr. Cornell, we have had some concerns raised about Mason's interactions with other children, but Mrs. Henderson and her husband have been very cooperative in addressing these issues. They've made substantial contributions to our anti-bullying program and have worked closely with our counseling staff." I felt my jaw clench. Contributions. What kind of contributions? The Henderson family donated $50,000 for new playground equipment and funded our conflict resolution program. They've been very committed to creating a positive environment for all students. The pieces started falling into place. Jessica and Brad weren't just defending their son's behavior, they were buying their way out of consequences. Principal Williams. I need to know exactly how many incidents involving Mason have been reported, and what actions were taken. I'm afraid I can't discuss other students' records without proper authorization. However, I will say that all reported incidents have been thoroughly investigated and appropriately addressed. After hanging up, I felt sick to my stomach. I decided to do some investigating of my own. That evening, I reached out to other parents whose children attended Tyler's school. What I discovered over the next few phone calls shocked me even more than Saturday's revelation. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose son Carlos was in Tyler's class, broke down crying when I mentioned Mason's name. "Mr. Cornell, I'm so glad someone is finally willing to talk about this. Mason has been tormenting Carlos for months. He cornered Carlos in the bathroom and held his head in the toilet while other kids watched. When I complained to the school, nothing happened. Then my husband started having problems at work. Problems at work. His supervisor suddenly started writing him up for minor infractions. His shift was changed to make life difficult for our family. We couldn't prove anything, but the timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Carlos's father works at the automotive plant, where Brad Henderson's company provides security services. The Thompson family had moved to another school district entirely. When I tracked down Mrs. Thompson's phone number and called her, she was initially reluctant to discuss their experience. But when I explained what had happened to Tyler, she opened up. "Mason broke our daughter's arm on the playground," she said quietly. "He claimed it was an accident, but 3 children witnessed him deliberately push her off the climbing structure. When we tried to file a formal complaint, suddenly our house went on the market without our permission." "What do you mean?" Jessica Henderson was our real estate agent. She claimed there was a paperwork error and that we had signed documents agreeing to list our property. Then she made sure every showing was a disaster. Potential buyers were told about neighborhood problems that didn't exist. Our sale fell through multiple times until we finally gave up and moved, just to get away from the whole situation. The pattern was becoming clear. Jessica and Brad weren't just enabling Mason's violent behavior. They were systematically intimidating and silencing anyone who tried to hold their son accountable. I arranged to meet with Jake Morrison, my childhood friend whose son attended Tyler's school at a coffee shop downtown. Jake brought a folder thick with documentation. Cornell. I've been keeping records of everything Mason has done to my son David at soccer practice. Look at this. Jake spread photographs across the table, showing bruises, scratches, and what appeared to be bite marks on his 7-year-old son. Mason isn't just hitting kids. He's using psychological torture techniques. He told David that he would break his legs if he ever scored a goal in a game. David hasn't touched a soccer ball outside of required practice for 3 months. Have you reported this? Of course I have. But every time I file a complaint, it disappears into a black hole. The coach claims he never sees anything inappropriate. The league officials say it's just competitive spirit. And somehow, every parent who complains ends up having their registration fees mysteriously increase or their child getting benched for bogus infractions. Jake leaned across the table and lowered his voice. Cornell, there's something else. I did some digging into Brad Henderson's background. His company doesn't just provide security services. They specialize in corporate intimidation and what they call reputation management. He knows exactly how to pressure people without leaving obvious fingerprints. That night, I sat in Tyler's bedroom while he slept, watching my son's peaceful face and thinking about the systematic campaign of terror he'd been enduring. Tyler had been having nightmares for weeks, but I'd attributed them to normal childhood stress. Now, I understood he'd been living in constant fear of retaliation. Amanda found me there around midnight. Can't sleep either. I keep thinking about how brave Tyler was to speak up on Saturday. He knew there would be consequences, but he did it anyway. Amanda sat down on the edge of Tyler's bed and gently smoothed his hair. He told me something else today while you were at work. He said Mason has been coaching other kids to lie about what they see. If any adults ask questions, Mason's trained them to say everything was just playing or accidents. I felt a chill run down my spine. A 9-year-old is running a systematic campaign of violence and intimidation, and my family is helping him cover it up. Cornell, we need to do something. This isn't just about Tyler anymore. Mason is hurting multiple children, and his parents are using their money and connections to make sure he never faces consequences. I looked down at my sleeping son and made a decision. You're right. It's time to fight back. Tuesday morning, I took a personal day from work and drove to the police station. Detective Sarah Morrison listened patiently as I laid out everything I'd discovered about Mason's pattern of violence and his parents' cover-up efforts. When I finished, she opened a thick file folder. "Mr. Cornell, I'm glad you came in today. We've been building a case on this situation for several weeks now." My heart jumped. A case? 3 different families have filed formal complaints about Mason Henderson's violent behavior toward their children. But every time we try to move forward, key witnesses change their stories or evidence mysteriously disappears. Detective Morrison spread out police reports and photographs. 2 months ago, Mason broke another child's nose on the playground. The incident was captured on school security cameras, but when we requested the footage, we were told there had been a technical malfunction and the recordings were corrupted. She pointed to a medical report. Danny Martinez was hospitalized with a concussion after Mason pushed him down a flight of stairs at school. 3 children witnessed the assault and gave consistent statements. But within a week, all 3 had recanted their testimony, claiming they'd been mistaken about what they saw. How is that possible? The Martinez family suddenly received an anonymous payment for Danny's medical expenses. The witness children's parents all reported unexpected job opportunities or financial windfalls around the same time their children changed their stories. Detective Morrison pulled out another document. "We've also been investigating Brad Henderson's business practices. His company has been accused of using illegal surveillance and intimidation tactics against business competitors. The complaints keep getting withdrawn before they reach court, usually after the complainants receive better job offers, or their businesses suddenly become more profitable." I stared at the evidence spread across her desk. So, Jessica and Brad have turned intimidation into an art form. It appears they've been protecting Mason using the same techniques Brad uses in his corporate work. They identify pressure points in people's lives and then apply just enough leverage to ensure cooperation. Detective Morrison leaned back in her chair. The problem is proving it in court. They're very careful to make everything look voluntary and coincidental. But patterns don't lie, and we're building a strong case. Well, what can I do to help? Keep documenting everything. If Tyler remembers any additional details about threats or incidents, write them down immediately. And be careful. If the Hendersons realize you're actively investigating them, they'll likely try to pressure you too. That afternoon, I met with Patricia Golden, the family law attorney Detective Morrison had recommended. Patricia specialized in cases involving systematic child abuse and institutional cover-ups. "Cornell, what you're describing is more complex than typical bullying. This appears to be a coordinated conspiracy involving the school administration, local business connections, and possibly coaching league officials." Patricia spread out a legal pad and started taking notes. "Tell me everything you know about the school's response to complaints." I detailed my conversation with Principal Williams and the suspicious pattern of dismissed incidents. Patricia nodded grimly. "I've seen similar cases where wealthy families essentially purchase immunity for their children's behavior. The key is documenting the quid pro quo relationships between donations and administrative decisions. How do we prove that? We'll need to establish a timeline correlating Jessica and Brad's financial contributions to the school with the dismissal of complaints against Mason. We'll also need testimony from other affected families and evidence of the intimidation tactics used to silence them." Patricia leaned forward. "Cornell, I have to warn you that fighting this kind of entrenched corruption is going to be expensive and emotionally draining. These people have demonstrated they're willing to use whatever leverage they have to protect their interests. What kind of leverage? They'll attack your reputation, your employment, your financial stability. They'll claim Tyler is a troubled child who makes up stories for attention. They'll suggest you're an unstable parent pursuing frivolous litigation for money. I thought about Tyler's bruised ribs and the fear in his eyes. I don't care what they do to me. My son deserves to feel safe at school. That evening, Amanda and I sat Tyler down for a gentle conversation about everything he'd experienced with Mason. We assured him that he wouldn't get in trouble for telling the truth, and that we were going to make sure he was protected. Tyler's revelations were even worse than I'd imagined. He described incidents where Mason had locked smaller children in storage closets, forced kids to eat dirt from the playground, and threatened to burn down their houses if they told their parents. "Daddy," Tyler said quietly. Mason showed me pictures on his phone of where lots of kids live. He said he knows how to get into their houses because his dad taught him. Amanda and I exchanged horrified glances. "Tyler, what kind of pictures?" "Pictures of kids' bedrooms taken from outside their windows." Mason said he watches kids when they're sleeping, and that he could hurt them any time he wants. I felt sick. We weren't dealing with a schoolyard bully. We were dealing with a child who displayed clear sociopathic behavior and had been trained by his parents to avoid consequences. That night, I called Detective Morrison and reported Tyler's latest disclosures. She agreed to increase patrol presence around our neighborhood and advised us to install security cameras around our house. "Cornell, I need to tell you something else. We've been investigating Brad Henderson's business connections, and we've discovered some troubling information. His company has contracts with multiple school districts, youth sports leagues, and municipal departments. His influence extends much deeper than we initially realized. What does that mean for our case? It means we need to be extremely careful about who we trust and how we proceed. There are people in positions of authority who have financial incentives to protect the Henderson family's reputation." As I hung up the phone, I realized that what had started as a birthday party confrontation had revealed a complex web of corruption and intimidation. But I also knew that Tyler and the other children deserved adults who were willing to fight for them regardless of the cost. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready for war. Thursday afternoon, my phone rang while I was reviewing quarterly reports at work. Detective Morrison's voice was tense and urgent. "Cornell, we need to talk immediately. Can you meet me at the station in 30 minutes? 25 minutes later, I was sitting across from Detective Morrison in an interview room, my heart pounding, as she opened a new case file. Early this morning, 7-year-old Danny Martinez was found unconscious in the school bathroom with a severe concussion. Security footage shows Mason Henderson entering the bathroom immediately before Danny and leaving right after. This time, we have clear evidence." I felt my blood turn to ice. "Is Danny okay?" "He's in the hospital. The doctors say he has a significant brain injury from blunt force trauma to the back of his head. Mason appears to have slammed Danny's head against the bathroom wall multiple times." Detective Morrison pulled out photographs that made my stomach turn. But here's the crucial part. The Martinez family initially pressed charges for aggravated assault against a minor. They gave detailed statements about Mason's previous threats against Danny and their failed attempts to get help from the school. She flipped to another document. But this morning they suddenly withdrew all charges and refused to cooperate with the investigation. What changed? According to the hospital billing department, someone anonymously paid Danny's entire medical bill, which is expected to exceed $200,000. The Martinez family also received a cashier's check for $50,000 with a note expressing sympathy for their son's accident. I stared at the evidence in disbelief. They bought their way out of an attempted murder charge. It gets worse. 3 children who witnessed the assault and gave initial statements to school officials have now claimed they saw Danny slip and fall by himself. Their families all reported sudden financial windfalls coinciding with their children's changed testimony. Detective Morrison leaned across the table. "Cornell, we're dealing with a systematic obstruction of justice. The Henderson family has perfected a method of neutralizing criminal charges through financial manipulation. When I got home that evening, Amanda met me at the door with tears in her eyes. Tyler's teacher called. Mrs. Chen wants to meet with us tonight after school hours. She says it's urgent and that we should come alone." We met Mrs. Chen in her empty classroom at 7 o'clock. She looked exhausted and frightened as she spread out a thick folder of documents. "Mr. and Mrs. Cornell, I need to show you something, but first, I need your promise that you'll never reveal I gave you this information." Amanda and I exchanged glances and nodded. Mrs. Chen opened the folder to reveal dozens of incident reports, photographs of injured children, and detailed behavioral observations spanning the entire school year. "I've been documenting every interaction I've witnessed between Mason Henderson and other students. What I've discovered terrifies me. The photographs showed children with bruises, scratches, bite marks, and what appeared to be burns. The incident reports detailed systematic psychological and physical abuse that went far beyond typical bullying." "Mrs. Chen," I said quietly, "why haven't these reports been forwarded to the administration?" "They have been. Every single one. But Principal Williams told me that the Henderson family's contributions to the school make Mason's behavioral issues a delicate matter that requires special handling." She pulled out a recording device. "I started secretly recording my conversations with the administration after they threatened to terminate my employment for filing excessive reports about Mason." Mrs. Chen played a recording of Principal Williams saying, "Jennifer, you need to understand that the Henderson family has been extremely generous to our school district. We can't afford to jeopardize that relationship over childhood conflicts that will resolve themselves naturally." Mrs. Chen. Amanda said, "Are you saying the school is deliberately ignoring evidence of serious child abuse?" "I'm saying the school administration has made a calculated decision to protect their funding source rather than the students in their care. And it's not just Mason they're protecting. I've observed Brad Henderson coaching Mason on how to manipulate adults and avoid consequences." She pulled out her phone and showed us a video. "I recorded this last week when Brad came to pick up Mason after another incident." The video showed Brad Henderson quietly instructing Mason, "Remember what we practiced. If anyone asks questions, you say the other kid was bothering you first and you were just defending yourself. Stick to the story and don't add extra details that might contradict what we've already established." I felt nauseous watching a grown man teach his child how to lie about assaulting other children. "Mrs. Chen, why are you risking your job to help us?" "Because I became a teacher to protect children, not to enable their abuse. Mason Henderson is a dangerous child who's being trained to become an even more dangerous adult. If we don't stop this now, someone is going to get seriously hurt or killed." That night, Amanda found Tyler sitting in his closet, frantically cutting up pieces of paper with scissors. When she asked what he was doing, Tyler looked up with wide, terrified eyes. "I'm practicing," he whispered. "Practicing what, sweetheart?" "Mason showed me a video on his phone of him cutting up a picture of me. He said that's what he's going to do to my face if I keep causing trouble for his family." Amanda gently took the scissors away and held Tyler close. "Baby, you don't have to practice anything. Daddy and I are going to make sure Mason can't hurt you anymore." But Tyler shook his head vigorously. "You don't understand. Mason told me his dad knows where you work, Amanda. He said they could hurt you too if I don't shut up about everything. I realized we'd reached a breaking point. Mason wasn't just terrorizing children at school. He was escalating to direct threats against my family. The systematic intimidation campaign had evolved into active stalking and threatening behavior. That night, I called an emergency meeting with Detective Morrison and Patricia Golden. We agreed that the situation had become too dangerous to handle through normal channels. Cornell. Detective Morrison said, "We need to accelerate our investigation. Mason's behavior is escalating rapidly, and someone is going to get seriously hurt if we don't intervene soon." Patricia nodded grimly. "The Henderson family has made a critical mistake by threatening your wife directly. That gives us grounds for restraining orders and emergency protective measures. What's our next move? We're going to turn their own tactics against them. If they want to play dirty, we'll show them what real accountability looks like." As I drove home that night, I realized that protecting Tyler was going to require me to be stronger and more determined than I'd ever been in my life. But I also knew that I wasn't going to let a 9-year-old sociopath and his enabler parents destroy my family or any other children. The gloves were coming off. Friday morning, I took another personal day and drove to Patricia Golden's law office. She'd assembled a war room with evidence boards, legal documents, and recording equipment that would make a detective proud. "Cornell, we're going to execute a coordinated legal assault that will overwhelm the Henderson family's ability to cover up and intimidate their way out of consequences." Patricia spread out a comprehensive battle plan. "First, we're going to file simultaneous civil lawsuits on behalf of 6 different families whose children have been assaulted by Mason. Each lawsuit will demand full financial records showing how the Hendersons have bribed their way out of accountability. Won't they just try to buy off the families like they did before? Not this time. I've been working with each family individually, and they're all committed to seeing this through regardless of financial pressure. The Martinez family is particularly motivated since Danny is still in the hospital with ongoing complications from his brain injury." Patricia pulled out a thick legal brief. "Second, we're filing criminal complaints against Brad Henderson for witness tampering, bribery, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Detective Morrison has been building this case for months, and we finally have enough evidence to proceed. What about Jessica's involvement? We're filing ethics complaints with the State Real Estate Board, documenting how she's used her professional access to intimidate clients and manipulate property transactions as retaliation against families who complained about Mason." Patricia gestured to a stack of recording equipment. "But the most important part of our strategy involves gathering fresh evidence. We're going to give the Hendersons enough rope to hang themselves." That afternoon, I met with Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the child psychologist Patricia had recommended. Dr. Hayes specialized in evaluating children with conduct disorders and had extensive experience testifying in family court proceedings. "Cornell, based on Tyler's description of Mason's behavior patterns, I'm extremely concerned about the potential for serious escalation. Children who display this level of calculated violence and manipulation at age 9 often develop into dangerous adolescents and adults if left untreated." Dr. Hayes pulled out a psychological evaluation form. "I'd like to interview Tyler to assess the psychological trauma he's experienced, but I also want to document specific behavioral patterns that Mason has exhibited. This information will be crucial for establishing the severity of the threat Mason poses to other children. What exactly are you looking for? Systematic targeting of vulnerable victims, escalating violence over time, lack of empathy or remorse manipulation of adult authority figures, and evidence of coaching from parents. Based on what you've told me, Mason appears to display all of these characteristics. That evening, Amanda and I sat down with Tyler for what we promised would be his final interview about Mason's behavior. We explained that we were building a case to protect him and other children, but we needed his help to document everything accurately. Tyler's detailed account was even more disturbing than we'd anticipated. He described how Mason had created elaborate games centered around inflicting pain and humiliation on other children. Mason had convinced younger kids that getting hurt was fun and that they should hide their injuries from adults. Tyler, Amanda asked gently, "Has Mason ever talked about hurting adults?" Tyler nodded solemnly. He said his dad taught him how to break into people's houses without setting off alarms. Mason showed me pictures on his phone of the inside of kids' houses that he took when their families weren't home. I felt my blood pressure spike. What else did Mason say about breaking into houses? He said they practiced together. His dad teaches him how to move around inside a house without making noise and how to find things that would hurt people the most if they were missing. Amanda and I locked eyes across the table. We weren't just dealing with schoolyard bullying or even systematic child abuse. Mason and his father appeared to be engaging in criminal stalking and home invasion. Saturday morning, I executed the first phase of our counterattack. I'd arranged for Jessica and Brad to meet me at a coffee shop to discuss resolving our family conflict peacefully. What they didn't know was that I was wearing a wire, and Detective Morrison was monitoring our conversation from a nearby table. Jessica arrived first, looking confident and slightly condescending. "Cornell, I'm glad you called. This whole situation has gotten blown completely out of proportion." "Has it? Jessica, your son, hospitalized another child this week with a traumatic brain injury?" "That was clearly an accident. Boys roughhouse sometimes, and accidents happen. The Martinez family understands that, which is why they chose not to pursue any legal action." When Brad joined us 15 minutes later, he immediately took control of the conversation. "Cornell, let's cut through all the emotional nonsense and talk about what you really want here. What I want is for my son to be safe at school and for Mason to face appropriate consequences for his violent behavior." Brad laughed dismissively. "Your son is a weak, attention-seeking child who makes up stories to get sympathy. If you're looking for a payday from this situation, you're going to be disappointed. I'm not looking for money, Brad. I'm looking for accountability." Accountability. Brad leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Let me explain something about accountability, Cornell. I know where you work. I know your boss. I know your clients. I know where Tyler goes to school and where Amanda works at the hospital. If you continue pursuing this ridiculous campaign against my family, you're going to discover that accountability works both ways." I forced myself to remain calm, even as my hands shook with rage. "Are you threatening my family?" "Brad, I'm explaining reality. You're a small-town accountant with a modest income and limited connections. I'm a successful businessman with extensive resources and influential friends. If you want to turn this into a war, you should understand that you're going to lose everything you care about." Jessica nodded enthusiastically. "Cornell, you need to think about Tyler's future. Children who get labeled as troublemakers and liars don't do well in school or life. It would be terrible if Tyler's academic records showed a pattern of behavioral problems and false accusations. The threats were even more explicit than I'd hoped." Both Jessica and Brad had just incriminated themselves while being recorded by law enforcement. "So, you're saying that if I continue advocating for Tyler's safety, you'll retaliate against my family and sabotage my son's education?" "I'm saying that actions have consequences," Brad replied coldly. "Smart people learn to choose their battles carefully. After they left, Detective Morrison joined me at the table. Cornell, they just confessed to conspiracy witness intimidation and making terroristic threats. We have everything we need to arrest both of them. That evening, Patricia called with updates from our coordinated legal assault. Cornell, the results exceeded our expectations. Jessica and Brad made critical errors in their panic to contain the damage. What kind of errors? They contacted all 6 families we're representing and made explicit offers to pay substantial sums in exchange for withdrawing their lawsuits. But this time, every family recorded their conversations. Patricia's voice was triumphant. We now have documented evidence of systematic bribery attempts, threats against witnesses, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The Henderson family just destroyed their own defense. Sunday night, Tyler came to Amanda and me with something he'd been hiding for weeks. He pulled out a small digital recorder from under his mattress. "I've been recording Mason whenever he threatens me," Tyler said quietly. "Mrs. Chen gave me this and taught me how to use it." The recordings were devastating. Mason's voice was clearly identifiable as he described in graphic detail how he would hurt Tyler, Amanda, and me if we continued causing problems for his family. Most damning was Mason's casual description of his father's coaching sessions where Brad taught him specific techniques for avoiding detection while harming other children. I realized that Tyler, Mrs. Chen, Detective Morrison, Patricia Golden, and I had built an ironclad case against the Henderson family. Their systematic campaign of violence and intimidation was about to face the accountability they'd avoided for so long. The final battle was about to begin. Monday morning, I called Jessica and requested a family meeting to resolve our conflict once and for all. I suggested we meet at my mother Dorothy's house since she'd been trying to mediate between us. What Jessica and Brad didn't know was that Detective Morrison, 2 Child Protective Services investigators, and a family court judge were standing by with arrest warrants. Dorothy's living room felt tense as family members gathered that evening. Jessica and Brad arrived with their attorney, a slick-looking man named Robert Kane, who specialized in defending wealthy clients accused of white-collar crimes. "Before we begin," Attorney Kane announced, "my clients want to make a generous offer to resolve this family dispute amicably." He placed a cashier's check for $100,000 on Dorothy's coffee table. In the interest of family harmony, the Henderson family is prepared to establish a college fund for Tyler and cover any therapy costs he may need. I looked at the check and felt nauseated. "You think you can buy your way out of accountability for your son's systematic violence against children?" Jessica leaned forward earnestly. "Cornell, we're not buying anything. We're acknowledging that children sometimes have conflicts, and we want to help Tyler move forward positively." "Move forward from what exactly?" Brad answered smoothly. "From whatever misunderstandings may have occurred between the boys. Children sometimes exaggerate situations, and we want to make sure Tyler has every opportunity to succeed, despite any confusion he may have experienced." I pulled out my phone and played one of Tyler's recordings. Mason's voice filled the room as he described how he was going to break Tyler's fingers and burn down our house. The recording included Mason's casual mention of his father, teaching him how to disable home security systems. The silence that followed was deafening. Attorney Kane's face had gone pale, and both Jessica and Brad looked genuinely shocked that their son's words had been documented. "Where did you get that recording?" Brad demanded. "Tyler has been documenting Mason's threats for weeks. We have hours of recordings where your son describes detailed plans to harm children and adults." I played another clip where Mason bragged about putting a kindergartner in the hospital and how his parents made sure he never got in trouble for it. Dorothy gasped audibly as she heard her grandson casually discussing serious assault. "That's not. Mason wouldn't," Jessica stammered, but her words trailed off as the evidence mounted. Attorney Kane tried to regain control. Recordings made without consent are not admissible in court, and children often exaggerate or fantasize about dramatic situations. Detective Morrison chose that moment to enter through Dorothy's front door, followed by 2 CPS investigators. Actually, counselor recordings made by minor victims documenting ongoing threats are absolutely admissible under child protection statutes. Jessica jumped to her feet. "What is this Cornell you called the police?" "I called them because your son hospitalized a 7-year-old with traumatic brain injury, and you covered it up through bribery and intimidation." Detective Morrison spread documentation across Dorothy's dining table. "Jessica and Brad Henderson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to obstruct justice witness tampering bribery of public officials and making terroristic threats." But before anyone could move toward the handcuffs, Mason burst through the front door. He'd apparently been listening from outside and had worked himself into a rage upon hearing the recordings of his own voice. "Nobody can arrest my parents!" Mason screamed, his face twisted with fury. "We don't have to follow stupid rules because we're better than everyone else." Dorothy, still shaken from hearing the recordings, approached Mason with grandmotherly concern. "Mason, sweetheart, calm down. Let's talk about this peacefully." What happened next shocked everyone in the room. Instead of accepting Dorothy's comfort, Mason violently shoved his own grandmother with both hands, sending her tumbling backward down Dorothy's 3-step entry stairs. The sound of Dorothy hitting the hardwood floor was sickening. She cried out in pain as her hip twisted at an unnatural angle, and blood immediately began pooling from where her head had struck the corner of the coffee table. Grandma Dorothy. I rushed to her side while Amanda immediately began applying first aid. "I call 911, Amanda shouted. "She has a possible fractured hip and definite head trauma." The room erupted in chaos as Jessica screamed at Mason, who showed absolutely no remorse for seriously injuring his own grandmother. Instead, Mason glared at Dorothy, writhing in pain, and said, "She shouldn't have gotten in my way. Old people need to mind their own business." Brad grabbed Mason's arm and whispered urgently, "Don't say anything else. Remember what we practiced about accidents." But Detective Morrison had heard everything. "Brad Henderson, are you seriously coaching your son to lie about assaulting his own grandmother while she's bleeding on the floor?" Attorney Kane tried desperately to control the situation. Everyone needs to remain calm. This appears to be an unfortunate accident involving a child who was emotionally overwhelmed. Accident. I pointed at Mason, who was still glaring at Dorothy with undisguised contempt. Your client just watched his 9-year-old son deliberately assault a 60-year-old woman and showed no remorse whatsoever. The paramedics arrived within minutes and began working on Dorothy, who was conscious but clearly in severe pain. As they prepared to transport her to the hospital, she grabbed my hand weakly. "Cornell," she whispered, "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. That child. There's something terribly wrong with that child." While Dorothy was being taken to the ambulance, Detective Morrison formally arrested Jessica and Brad. The CPS investigators immediately took emergency custody of Mason, who screamed threats at everyone in the room as they led him away. "I'll get all of you," Mason shouted as he was placed in the CPS vehicle. "My dad taught me how to find where people live. You can't hide from me." Even being arrested, Mason continued displaying the calculated cruelty that had terrorized so many children. Watching him being driven away, I realized we'd just witnessed a 9-year-old sociopath who had been systematically enabled by adults who should have protected society from him. Attorney Kane followed his clients to the police station, but the damage was already done. In one evening, the Henderson family had lost all credibility and exposed themselves as enablers of a dangerous child who posed a genuine threat to public safety. As I rode in the ambulance with Dorothy to the hospital, I reflected on how Mason's final act of violence had revealed his true nature to the one family member who had been most resistant to accepting the truth about him. Justice was finally within reach. 3 months later, I sat in a family courtroom watching Judge Patricia Stevens deliver the final verdict in what had become known locally as the Henderson case. Tyler sat beside me looking healthier and more confident than he had in months. After reviewing all evidence witness testimony and psychological evaluations, Judge Stevens announced, "This court finds that Mason Henderson poses a significant danger to public safety and requires immediate intervention in a secure therapeutic environment." Mason was sentenced to 2 years in a specialized residential treatment facility for children with severe conduct disorders. The facility specialized in intensive psychological intervention for youth who displayed sociopathic tendencies and violent behavior patterns. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes had testified that Mason showed clear signs of antisocial personality disorder and would require years of intensive therapy to have any chance of rehabilitation. She had also recommended that Mason have no unsupervised contact with other children until he demonstrated genuine progress in recognizing and controlling his violent impulses. Jessica received 3 years in state prison for conspiracy to obstruct justice bribery of public officials and witness tampering. The judge had been particularly harsh in sentencing because Jessica had used her professional position to intimidate and silence crime victims. Brad received 5 years in federal prison for racketeering witness intimidation and operating a criminal conspiracy that had corrupted multiple institutions across 2 counties. The FBI had discovered that Brad's company had been systematically bribing school officials, youth league administrators, and municipal employees to cover up Mason's escalating violence. Principal Janet Williams was fired and faced criminal charges for accepting bribes and failing to report child abuse. She was replaced by Dr. Michael Chen, a former military officer with extensive experience in child protection protocols. The school district implemented comprehensive anti-bullying policies with zero tolerance for violence and mandatory reporting procedures that couldn't be circumvented by wealthy donors. They also established an independent ombudsman position to investigate complaints about administrative misconduct. Tyler's recovery had been remarkable to witness. Dr. Hayes worked with him twice weekly, helping him process the trauma of being systematically terrorized while teaching him healthy coping strategies. Tyler had initially struggled with guilt about getting Mason in trouble, but gradually came to understand that protecting other children was the right thing to do, uttered Daddy. Tyler had said one evening about a month into his therapy, "Dr. Hayes helped me understand that telling the truth isn't what hurt Mason. Mason hurt himself by choosing to hurt other people." Amanda and I had also attended family counseling sessions to address the stress the situation had placed on our marriage. The experience had ultimately brought us closer together as we'd worked as a team to protect Tyler and fight for justice. Mrs. Chen received a commendation from the State Education Department for her courage in documenting abuse and supporting victims despite institutional pressure to remain silent. She became a powerful advocate for teacher protection programs that encouraged educators to report suspicious behavior without fear of retaliation. the Martinez family finally received justice for Danny's injuries. Danny had recovered physically from his brain injury, though he continued to receive speech therapy and cognitive rehabilitation. The family used their lawsuit settlement to establish a foundation supporting families affected by school violence. 6 other families who had been silenced by the Hendersons' intimidation campaign came forward with their own lawsuits and criminal complaints. The evidence we'd gathered helped prosecutors build cases that resulted in additional charges against Brad for his systematic corruption activities. Dorothy recovered fully from her hip fracture and head injury, though the experience had profoundly changed her perspective on family loyalty versus child protection. She visited Tyler weekly and often spoke about how proud she was of his courage in speaking up despite the risks. Cornell, she'd told me recently, watching Mason hurt me made me realize that evil doesn't respect family relationships. That child felt no connection to me whatsoever, despite all the love and attention I'd given him over the years. Dorothy had also established a college fund for Tyler, using money she'd previously planned to leave to Jessica. I want Tyler's education to be funded by someone who believes in justice and truth, she had explained. Tyler returned to school with a new sense of confidence and purpose. He'd become something of a hero among his classmates for standing up to Mason's reign of terror. More importantly, he'd learned that adults would listen to him and take action when he reported problems. Tyler had also become an advocate for other children who experienced bullying. He'd spoken at several school assemblies about the importance of telling trusted adults about threats and violence, even when the perpetrators tried to silence victims through intimidation. The thing I learned, Tyler had told his classmates, is that bullies want you to feel alone and scared. But when you tell the truth to people who care about you, you're not alone anymore. Amanda and I had established the Tyler Cornell Child Protection Foundation using the settlement money from our lawsuit against the school district. The foundation provided legal support and counseling services for families dealing with systematic bullying and institutional cover-ups. Our first major initiative was funding independent child advocates in school districts across the state. These advocates would investigate complaints about violence and abuse that school administrators might be reluctant to pursue due to political or financial pressures. As I reflected on everything we'd been through, I realized that the experience had taught our family important lessons about courage, persistence, and the responsibility adults have to protect all children, not just their own. Tyler had shown incredible bravery in speaking up, despite knowing he would face retaliation. Amanda had provided unwavering support while using her professional skills to document evidence of abuse. I'd learned that protecting children sometimes requires taking on powerful institutions and wealthy individuals who believe they're above accountability. Most importantly, we'd all learned that justice requires ordinary people to take extraordinary risks when confronting systematic abuse and corruption. The birthday party that had seemed like such a disaster 3 months ago had ultimately become the catalyst for protecting countless children from a dangerous predator and his enabling family. Tyler's quiet voice that Saturday afternoon had shattered more than just Jessica's champagne glass. It had broken open a conspiracy that had terrorized children while corrupting the institutions meant to protect them. Tyler was now 10 years old, thriving in school, and surrounded by genuine friends who valued kindness over power. He still occasionally had nightmares about Mason's threats, but they were becoming less frequent as he continued processing his experiences with Dr. Hayes. "Daddy," Tyler had asked me just last week, "do you think Mason will ever learn to be nice to people?" "I hope so, son. That's why he's getting help from doctors who specialize in teaching children how to make better choices. I hope he does learn, Tyler had replied thoughtfully. Not because I want to be friends with him, but because I don't want him to hurt any more kids. That response showed me that Tyler had developed genuine empathy and wisdom far beyond his years. The trauma he'd experienced had been transformed into compassion for others and a commitment to protecting vulnerable people. As I tucked Tyler into bed that night, I realized that our family's fight for justice had created something beautiful from something terrible. We'd turned Mason's campaign of terror into a force for positive change that would protect children for years to come. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right to protect someone vulnerable? Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are against people we love who've lost their way. I'd love to hear about times when you've had to stand up for justice even when it was difficult or costly. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart or made you think about the importance of protecting children from systematic abuse, please hit that like button to help more people see this message. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about ordinary people finding the courage to fight for justice, and please share this video with anyone who might need to hear that their voice matters when speaking up for those who can't protect themselves. Thank you for taking this journey with me. I hope Tyler's story inspires you to believe that one person's courage to tell the truth can change everything for the better. Until next time, remember that protecting children is everyone's responsibility, and justice sometimes requires us to risk everything we hold dear to do what's right.